Awesome. Okay, so I'll call this open meeting of the New Westminster Police Board to order at 10:09. As always, we'll start our meeting with a land acknowledgement. We recognize and respect that New Westminster is on the unceded and unsurrendered land of the Halkanilan speaking peoples. We acknowledge that colonialism has made invisible their histories and connections to the land. As a city, we are learning and building relationships with the people whose lands we are on. Can I have someone move to approve the agenda as written? Second, Heather, all in favor? Awesome. Okay, maybe before we start, we'll just do a quick round of introductions. There's a whole lot of folks at this table. I'll start. My name's Tasha Henderson. I'm a bit under the weather, so our kids started school and picked up all the germs. But it's been this way for a while, so I'm at the very tail end and not contagious, and it's not COVID, I promise. I'm the chair of the police board, new to this role, but happy to be.
My name's Paul Highland. I'm the acting chief constable.
David Borsma, vice chair. Kelsey Wall, board member.
Andrew Wickham, I'm the acting inspector in patrol division.
Jeff Scott, I'm the acting inspector in the administration division.
I'm the board member.
Colin Betts, I'm the acting inspector in the investigations division.
Ryan Long, I'm the acting inspector of KIMS.
Sarah Patterson, I'm the human resources manager.
Patrick Malone, board member. Damon Ward, acting deputy chief.
Haley Finnegan, communications.
And Jacqueline Daring, manager of finance.
Awesome. Drew?
Hey folks, I'm Drew Hart. I'm the director of the board.
Drew's in Chicago. Mary?
Hi everyone, Mary Trentadue, board member. I'm downtown Vancouver in a little cubby and my Wi-Fi is wobbly, so I may freeze a lot.
Awesome, awesome. Do any of the board members want to pull anything off consent?
2.8.
Sorry?
2.8.
2.8. Anybody else? Kelsey?
Could I please pull 2.4 and 2.6 and 2.9?
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mary? Drew? Anything to pull off consent? Oh, shaking heads. Alejandro, Patrick?
Not for me.
Okay. Can I have someone move to approve the consent agenda minus 2.4, 6, 8, and 9?
So moved.
So second, all in favor? Awesome. Okay, so we will go to 2.4, the monthly report on NWPD overtime. Kelsey, you pulled that. Do you have specific questions for Jacqueline?
Yeah, I just, again, as a new board member, I just wanted to ensure that I'm up to date and understand the report. So just a couple of questions I'm sure you can easily answer, but I just wanted to understand how, like, obviously there's variation in where we are against budget target with overtime. So I was just wondering how we approve and track overtime against the budget. And then are there certain departments that we assume or expect, like, on an ongoing basis will be working overtime? And then the third thing was just if we have a general sense on what the impact on overall overtime has been since the backfill strategy has been implemented.
Okay, so there's probably a few questions in there for maybe multiple people in terms of how it is approved. Maybe best for one of the inspectors of patrol or one of the groups. I don't approve the OT for sworn members, so I'm not sure if anyone wanted to speak.
I can speak to the first question. Yeah, we actually did a presentation to the board maybe a year ago about the different types of overtime. So obviously there's pre-planned overtime where we know in advance there's going to be a shortage or a resource shortage. The plan there generally is that we look at ways of mitigating that if we can, but if there is a requirement to have call out, it usually goes through the divisional manager at the time. Same with unplanned overtime, and that is generally in major crime and street crime when we have like a crime that just happens after hours. Very challenging. Obviously, we just had a significant incident that the board's aware of that we've done some media on that was a kidnapping file that involved a significant expense given that it happened after hours. And then there's also some other ancillary overtime costs that can be challenging as well, that being court costs for members on days off. We do our best to mitigate that. There's a collective agreement provisions in there about what they get paid when they're called to court on days off. I would say that's a smaller percentage of the overall overtime budget. But those are the general three types. But we do take steps in pre-planned incidents to see what we can do to mitigate those. And you'll see probably here, even amongst the patrol watches, you'll see differences there. Some watches are running a negative variance and some are not. And sometimes that just comes down to staffing issues that we just can't plan for a lot, whether it's sickness or illness or long-term leaves or just staffing challenges in general.
Okay, and then in terms of how the overtime is doing versus pre-backfill strategy, I actually don't have that comparison off the top of my head. That's something I could come back to. I know this year has had different challenges with all of the acting roles and positions there. We've had a little bit of a different challenge this year than we would have had last year. But that I can come back to the board with the actual numbers. So for comparison would be good to look at.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful if you don't mind doing that for next meeting.
Yep.
Were there any other questions in your list there, Kelsey?
That's great.
Okay. Did anyone else have questions about the overtime report? Mary, Drew? No, shaking heads. All right, the recommendation in that report is, I think it's just for information. Yeah, okay.
It's just a one pager that we added about a year ago for tracking.
Okay, I don't think we need to move to for receipt. Okay. Kelsey, 2.6 governance, Q2 financial report and 2024 forecast. So Jacqueline's on the hot seat.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay, I will also give you my two questions just off the top. So you mentioned under general office and administration that, and it's apparent in the sheet that you provided that there's legal fees that are challenging the administration department. I'm not clear on what those actually are, and just wondering if that we've adjusted or accounted for that in our 2025 budget funding. Do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I can. We did increase our legal fees last year to try to do it. We kind of did a 5-year average on where we've been spending. Unfortunately, the last couple of years have been much higher than the previous times. We haven't adjusted in our 2025 budget for additional legal fees. It's something that we hope will come down. I'll can speak to what is in there, but we haven't added an additional. We certainly can. That wasn't done for 25. No. Okay.
Yeah, just to add to that, as far as the legal fees and the expenditures, I mean, we try to do, our best guess, kind of based on a 3 or a 5-year average even. These are unpredictable because we don't know what's kind of coming down the pipe. I mean, there's certain ones that are kind of consistent and steady. But for some of the issues that we'll be talking about in closed, there can be flexibility in what those costs are. And we have seen those costs escalating over the last few years.
Yeah, okay, just strikes me that perhaps we should have a conversation about that. And then the other question I just wanted to ask is there's a system usage fee that has a really large budget to forecast variance. I was just wondering what that is.
That is the IT stuff. There was let me just see if I can.
It's under general office, if that
Okay, so
helps.
that's gonna be mostly IT. Majority of that is there's another account. So you're talking about the one that's right pared down, right? System usage.
Yeah.
So some of that there was grant recovery. So we post the expense to the line and then we recover it under. But a lot of it actually has to do with more about where we're spending our funds now. Last year I didn't get a chance to do a really thorough reallocation. We're kind of moving away from hardware and more things are cloud-based. So I think really that if you see there's some other like computer equipment we're expected to be under budget. So it's sort of like where we're spending it. This is very granular. But if you roll it up, the IT department is in line with where it should be.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Anybody else have questions? I have a question that I can wait. Jacqueline, I think it might be helpful just to clarify for like the community, if the budget is over budget by year end, where does that money come from? Is that city reserves? Is that, yeah.
City reserves.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, so we tried to keep the city as up to date as possible on where we are. No, I'm hopeful some of my estimates, I've tried to consider as much as possible, not worst case scenario, but being realistic. I know we've had the council and the city is aware of the overage that we should expect with the salary increase that we discussed earlier in the year. So I think Q2 is, you're kind of halfway through the year, you have some idea. Q3 will even be closer to, so yeah.
Awesome. Anyone else? Okay, so that was just, I think, move to receipt as well. Heather, equal 2.8.
And just,
which is, sorry, I'm just gonna read it out for Teresa's benefit there. The NWPD 2023 annual report.
just so mostly questions about the last page where there's like some graphics with like statistics. And just, well, I have a feedback that there's an error. There's 2 faster motor vehicle boxes and they're different numbers. So one says 523 faster motor vehicle, and then right below it says 475 faster motor vehicle.
Oh. With the I know the page you're referring to. We're comparing 2023 numbers to 2022 numbers.
So the comparison is at the bottom of each box.
Okay.
So 2022 both times,
Yeah.
but then there's a separate number next to the year. Maybe indicates something different that way.
But it's like a repeat, but different numbers for 2022 and for 2023.
It's this.
Oh, I see. Thank you. I will, that might, I'll double check what those are. Thanks for bringing that to my attention.
The other piece is like, how do we choose what to put in here? Because what I would like is more for, like, this is the annual report of the police. And a lot of it's just about the crimes that are occurring in the city. And I would more like to be what we're doing. So instead of like 523 faster motor vehicles, how many of those, like, did we intervene and stop? Like, like what I mean versus like 15 square kilometers is our jurisdiction size. Well, that's never going to change. I don't really think we need to have that statistic in like a box like this. So I'd prefer it to be more like things we've achieved versus things that happened.
Yeah, I like to give more attention to the things that we've achieved in the articles above that. So we talk about the launch of the Communications Operations Center and our Bait Bite program. And so the graphic that you're looking at, I'm hoping to kind of reproduce what the city does sometimes, which is a kind of by the numbers, they just collect kind of interesting numbers to showcase some things about the police department. But
like for me, when I read this as a citizen, I think 86 break and enters, but what happened with them? You know what I mean? Like, what did the police do with that? So I would prefer to have kind of, if we're gonna have 86 break and enters and 43 were solved, like, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. Because this for me just shows basically crime in our community and not really what the police have done.
Mary?
Thanks. My question is very similar to what Heather has just addressed. I guess I don't know where the role is for the police board in this plan, and maybe there never has been a role, or maybe we need to discuss that when we do our governance work. But I guess I would say the community doesn't probably see the difference between the police board and the police department, and so I think it would be helpful for the police board to have some kind of presence, I guess, in a way in this report. And I'm just wondering, I don't know, Paul, if you want to provide some background or insight on that, but I think based on, obviously what Heather said, we may have some ideas about how we might like to see the numbers, and maybe it's not our document and maybe it's not up to us, but I do think it's important that we have a discussion about what the public is seeing, because I think we have some relevance in that as well.
Yeah, I think that just with the history of it, I don't know if traditionally there's been a ton of interface between the department and the board with regards to the annual report. I know we've vacillated between very kind of data-driven reports. At one point, we were doing videos, kind of community-based videos. So I do want to thank Haley for putting her work into this. But yeah, I do think that the board is the employer, and certainly the board can and should have input into a report about its department. So I think maybe moving forward, like we can go back with some of this stuff, some of the feedback and make some tweaks. But certainly moving forward, we could bring this document forward, similar to a strategic plan. Staff's doing a lot of the work, but the board certainly, should have some input into that and into what the final product looks like, as much as it wants or not, right? The board may be like, no, we're good if you just deal with it, but yeah.
Yeah, even just to have, sorry, Haley, just very quickly to say, even if we have an opportunity to like provide input or not, I think that would be really helpful for the next time it's produced.
Yeah, we can maybe bring it forward earlier, maybe in even a closed format for the board to have a look and provide some feedback and input and go from there.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank
totally.
you.
Just a quick caution from the academic perspective, when we're talking about things like clearance rates or weighted clearance rates, they can look shockingly low to the public. And so when we're talking about public confidence in the police service, you have to be careful with which numbers you trot out, especially given they're just numbers and there's not a lot of context there. So it's about framing things delicately.
Yeah, I think, just to echo what some have said, I think the reality is that most people don't stop to read the content of the report. So most people, if they're browsing through, will look at these sort of snapshot numbers. And I think that's why the city does that. And I personally wouldn't, I would get 18,000 calls, that would be, but then I'd be like, 223 were abandoned, that's like what would stick with me more than 223 out of 18,000 is like a very small number. But I think, knowing that we've, what our response rate is and time and those kinds of things and how many new recruits we have that year. I think sometimes it's good to balance some good news story for the community to have confidence that, they're not just sort of focusing on what's happening to them and to the community.
Yeah, the intention is that the annual report serves as highlights of both our internal initiatives as well as a summary of some of the more high profile files that we worked on that got a lot of media and public attention.
Anybody else? Good. Okay, Kelsey, Miss Consent Puller. 2.9 is, let me just get back to it.
It would have been just a boring meeting.
Yes, exactly. The Crime Severity Index report.
Yeah, so thanks for this report, Paul. I just wanted to pull this maybe for a bit of conversation and perhaps to hear, your color commentary on how you interpret this. I know this number is very germane to some of the conversations that are forthcoming for the board, thinking about, our considerations about our authorized force. And so I just wanted the opportunity to have a bit of conversation about, what does this actually mean? I did think one thing that stood out to me offhand was it was interesting that they note in 2022 the weighting of violent crimes changed a bit, and we saw an overall decrease since 2021, even accounting for that increased weighting or changed weighting in the CSI. But I would just love to hear maybe your impressions.
Yeah, this report, I decided to put this report in again, just to give the board some context around what's public available information regarding Crime Severity Index. It is a singular data point for the board to consider, but we talk about some other data points, including pop to cop ratios, call volume, specific criminal code cases. And this is specific to criminal offenses, so it's not necessarily reflective of the general call load that our department's facing. It really just trying to paint a picture. I try to draw some comparators, how we're doing against the national average, the provincial average. Those aren't always indicative of where we are sitting as a department, because obviously nationally there's a tremendous amount of different style of police agencies, small, rural, large. But it's really just trying to, again, paint a picture for the board and highlight to the community the numbers that we're seeing within our organization. And to board member Lalonde's point, you can't necessarily read a lot into one data point. I think you have to take a more holistic look at all the different points. So as we move forward, these are just some of the things we want to highlight for the board, and that things that we track internally about, where we stand and where we measure ourselves.
Kelsey, did you have a follow-up question? Or?
No, I'll okay.
Yeah, I think more than a comparator between cities, I think CSI is a good indication of the severity of crime that's being dealt with in the community specifically. So the higher the score, the more serious, right, the types of crime that members are dealing with on a daily basis. So comparing the community to community for reasons that the acting chief just cited, right, take it or leave it, but the higher the score, or in our community specifically, the more it's increasing over time. And I think that's what our members are dealing with. So it's something to keep in mind in terms of things like staffing and so on.
Yeah. Mary, Drew, do you have any questions before we go back to second round speakers?
I have one question. Sorry, I had to change my screen, so I can't find my raise hand button, so I'm just going to talk. And I guess this is a question. I'm looking a little bit to Patrick as well, because I don't understand some of these things, and you're the academic in the table. So the weighted clearance rates dropped by what seems significantly between 2019 and 2023. Do we have a sense of why? And what's the implication of that if it's beyond just the obvious that we're not clearing as many cases?
I can offer a quick theory.
Sure.
So what I would say in my classroom, if I was teaching this right now, is that Canada's population has continued to grow during that time, but hiring of police officers has not kept up during that same period. And that's because of mass migration, for lack of a better explanation. So our pop to cop ratio in Canada used to be about 184, 185 per 100,000. Now we're down to the ballpark of about 180. There are more police officers as a number. Overall, there's about 70,000 change in Canada currently, but our population has outpaced that growth. So of course, the fewer officers you have, the fewer resources you have to tackle crime in communities, investigate things, clear things, including serious crimes, right? The weighted clearance rates reflecting that. So that'd be my guess.
Did you want to answer that?
The only other thing I would add to that, again, this is not, I can't say this is definitively the case, but investigations of crimes is becoming increasingly challenging. The level we have to deal with disclosure, crimes are becoming more complex when you're talking about child exploitation investigations. Again, we just had a recent case come out that's added more work to investigators where they have to get a search warrant now for the actual IP number. So to Patrick's point, and just the increased complexity, like we're dealing now with a budget ask for an electronic file agent to assist with disclosure to Crown Counsel for our criminal reports to Crown Counsel. So these things are incrementally being added to the policing world. And now we're looking at also increased levels of transcription, increased use of and gathering more technical data, including CCTV, downloading phones, downloading computers. There's probably not too many criminal investigations right now where it's not required that some electronic device needs to be downloaded, reviewed, sorted out. So that again takes members' time, and you know, from a speculative point of view, I think that detracts from their ability to be out there solving more crime.
Great, thanks for that. That gives some context for some of our budget discussions in closed. Thanks.
Patrick.
Let's just add to what Paul just mentioned in terms of complexity of modern policing. I mean, we see the reports, I think, in the closed session every week about the number of hours our officers are spending at Royal Columbian, right, waiting for people to be certified by mental health professionals and so on, in addition to being called to court, like we mentioned earlier, to testify in a case. And so there's a lot of sitting around time that's happening too, and that administrative burden is only increasing for policing over time, dealing with everything, drunk driving files and so on and so forth. So that keeps people off the street and solving things as well, right, all the administrative burden. So it's a very complex problem. Yeah, thanks, Paul, for adding to my very brief estimation of costs.
Kelsey?
Yeah, I think that's all really helpful, and especially around the weighted clearance number. I think, you know, point taken around the comparator between different jurisdictions being a sort of an imperfect measure. And I would just say, you know, as being a new board member, like I don't have all of the context on the CSI, so we did look back at the further sort of StatsCan tables, and I do think if we project out, 5 years further, so like looking at a 10-year comparison, even further, it does paint a bit of a different picture as to what's going on. So I think as we continue the conversations around, what does this particular indicator mean in the context of all of the other things that we're considering in the city, having sort of even a more broad view. For example, 10 years previously, paints a little bit of a different picture around what CSI and I didn't even look at weighted clearance. So, I just think we should keep that in mind as we continue the conversations.
Yeah, just to add to the conversation, I'm hopeful that the ops review that's pending, that will look at what it is, certainly on the front line, what frontline officers are doing. They obviously have reactive time, they're responding to calls for service, proactive time, that's out patrolling around, perhaps doing traffic enforcement, foot patrols, and of course, administrative time, which is again, doing all the paperwork, and then just their general downtime, having a break or whatever. So there's a pie chart there. I'm not sure exactly where those numbers land currently, but obviously the more reactive time that members are doing, responding to calls, the less time they have to be proactive and perhaps intervening in crimes in progress or getting to actually submitting the Crown Council. So I really hope we get a good sense of that from our localized context and then adjust out from there. And maybe some academic input as to what that pie chart should look like. Should it be a third for each category, or should it be more reactive or more proactive? I don't know the answer to that.
Mary?
Sorry, I forgot to put my hand up. I don't have much to add. I think it's a helpful start for us to dig into this information a bit further. And I found some of the things sort of surprising on it. I really wonder about what's happening in Victoria. That just seems so odd to me, but maybe, there's things happening there. I also think that in the comparisons of cities, like we're kind of like a very small but very urban city. And so we do show up in a similar way as Vancouver, and not Delta or, not some of the other municipal or Port Moody, because they really don't have the downtown core nor the SkyTrain stations that we have. So it's helpful information. And again, I think important not to zero in on only this information because there's a lot of other things we need to consider as well. But thank you for adding this to our bucket of resources for trying to figure it all out. I appreciate it.
Okay. I think that report is also just moved for receipt. Is that, yep. Okay, so that's it. Well, I think that was the shortest meeting of all time. I didn't pull 2.7, but before we adjourn, I do want to remind folks that we have the NWPD versus NW Fire Department Fall Classic invitation. I don't know if anyone here is playing. You're putting me in a real tricky predicament, sitting with two hats on. So I don't know if I can, be half like painted one way and half face painted the other way. But I think that's September 21st for the community to come out and watch the police officers and firefighters have Adder on the ice. And I will just ask that someone move to adjourn.
So moved.
Awesome. Okay. All in favor? All opposed? Great. Thank you, everyone.